Cool. So what I want to try to do is make sure that our KPI page actually reflects that it's super easy to get from the KPI page to the individual KPI. So we have two icons. Is something linked or is there a graph? So if it's linked, it means I can click this link and then there's a link to Sisense, which is cool. Now this is a live stream and it's public, so I'm not going to view IACV, but super helpful. Now there's, I think, two things that are my request. First of all, everything should have an icon. So it should either be a link, or it should have an embedded graph, or there should be an issue. And then the second thing would be, can the icon please be a link itself as well? So if it's this link thing, it should link directly to Sisense. If it's a graph that's embedded in the handbook, like sales efficiency, it should link directly to this graph so that I scroll immediately to this graph. And if there's an issue, if it's an icon like this and there's an issue, it shouldn't just say issue. This should just link to the issue. So in the end state, everything on this page, so everything up to this, will have an icon, either a link, a graph, or a work in progress. And every one of those icons will be a link to the information. That was the request.
He said that's really different from what we've discussed previously, where things that aren't being actively worked on don't have a construction logo next to them. So that logo, as it indicates in the legend today, is not just saying like, hey, here's a link to an issue where we're working on this. It's saying, here's a link to an issue that we're actively working on.
Okay, I think we should have all of our KPIs in our data warehouse. So if they're not, like, we should probably take them off as a KPI. If they're not important enough to put in our data warehouse, we should probably just take them off this page. So I'm not against discussing that for the things that we're like, hey, this doesn't make sense. So maybe instead of, Emily, I don't disagree, but let's talk about specific examples where you're like, hey, this doesn't make sense to put in the data warehouse.
I don't think there is, I'm not saying that that's the case. Kat, I'll defer to you here, but really, like, there's a matter of prioritization and there's an order in which things are being worked on, and the legend has been used to date to indicate like this is what we're actively working on, and things without icons. Okay. Them indicate.
Let's have a fourth icon which is not actively working on it.
Okay.
And you can pick the icon. Otherwise, I'll pick a chicken.
I like a chicken. A chicken sounds good. Stands out. Okay. That was super helpful, by the way. So that really solidified that statement we talked about in the group conversation. So thank you for that.
So I can actually share my screen and share the progress. So I also, thank you, Emily, for pointing that out. I agree. I think what we were probably missing was an additional icon. So I'm going to go ahead and share what I've implemented so far, and we can discuss through that a little bit. So let me share my screen. So here is the MR to the handbook to do this. This is that merge request. So I'm in the review app for this. What you'll see now is that if there is a chart, you can actually click on the chart and go directly to that chart. So it'll link you directly there. And then so for the link, it'll do the same. For the same reason, you're not going to, for the same reason, I'm not going to show that, but the links are now linkable. So if you look at the bottom of down here, you'll see that it'll take you to that URL as well. I do agree with you that this icon should link to the issue. So I will, if we have an issue and we are working on it, we'll put this icon. And then if not, I will wait for Emily to bring up a new icon that we can use for any ones that we're still discussing, such as these down here, which do not have yet KPI definition.
Great. That's awesome.
So just to be clear, so right now, the things that don't have KPI definitions, we will leave them up there and we will just have a separate icon. And I would assume though that it probably should have an issue though, or at least associated with them, right?
No need for an issue. The chicken can be the only one that doesn't link to an issue.
Okay, okay.
Awesome. And then for my next item, what I wanted to talk about is, I was going through all the commits for this page and I saw that you and Emily did a lot of work on it. So thank you guys so much for this page. I wanted to just hear the inspiration that led to this page from your perspective. And as we continue forward, what you think the direction of this page should be.
Yeah. Look, at any company, one of the most important things is like, hey, what does success look like? Tell me what success looks like. Especially like last year we grew the company, we tripled, so we wanted to make extra sure we were crisp about that. And then these KPIs get reflected in the key meeting. So in the key meeting for a certain department, we discuss hopefully there's a presentation with all the KPIs and all the OKRs. They also get used for setting goals for individuals. So every job description, we now have performance indicators. They don't necessarily need to be on the KPI page, but the KPI page is a good inspiration, like, oh, what does success look like for this role? What KPI should they be influencing? So that's the idea. And the idea is to have a lot of like early warnings for when we need to do things. So one of the board members has suggested, and Emily will work on that, to also say what are leading and what are trailing indicators, so that we're even more careful, like, hey, when we see a leading indicator going down, that is probably a bigger thing to focus on than when it's a trailing indicator.
That's awesome. Thank you for giving us that insight. And then the next one is, I've noticed that there are some pages that we're trying to make it consistent across other sections of the handbook as well. So since the handbook definition lives on other sections of the handbook, I was wondering, how do you think we can best collaborate across departments for handbook consistency for each division's individual KPI definition page?
Yeah, so it's totally cool if, like, for the people group has a KPI and the definition lists somewhere else. For example, that's the case for location factor. I hope we define location factor once, and it's still a KPI for every department. So there's no, hey, because it's in your KPIs, it needs to live in your section of the handbook. The only important thing is we define it only once. If you have a case you'd like to discuss, I'd be happy to discuss it in this call.
Sure, yeah, we can definitely discuss, for example, the average location factor chart. So that is on the people team, but I do know that we have separate charts that we've built out on the data team to support each department having that, division having that. And then I believe for the engineering department, we have it for each department as well. Would you like for us to do that across all divisions, or would it, and the departments within that, or I guess, what does that structure look like?
Yeah, I think I'll share my screen to try to visualize a bit. So here's the new hire location factor. It's a marketing KPI. Hopefully when I click on new hire location factor, it goes into hiring metrics. This is under people up. So that's great. That's the definition. And then in an ideal world, when I click this graph, I go directly to the one for marketing. And probably now I have to scroll, like it's by division, it's all a bit bundled up. But there should be a deep link, and that can be directly to Sisense, or it can be to an embedded one or something like that. I don't particularly care where it lives, as long as it lives in the handbook only one time. Does that answer your question?
So yeah, so I think let me just clarify to make sure that I've understood this correctly. So if the handbook definition should be in one place for any KPIs that are shared across divisions. If there's a main chart, in this case, there was a dashboard, it should link, if it's the people, it would link there. But if it's a marketing, the chart icon should actually link to the marketing specific version.
Yep, correct.
Got it. Thank you.
And the parent flag that I introduced, I guess, 2 weeks ago, helps solve for that because it makes the definitions inherited. So things like average location factor are defined in the people group. And then when engineering says, here's our average location factor, you don't need to duplicate the definition. You just parent is whatever, and the definition's kind of inherited at that point.
Thank you so much, by the way, Emily, for that. I did see that, and I think that's a great addition to this structure. So thank you for that addition. And then finally, the last item here that I wanted to discuss was we've now created a Sisense dashboard for updating the KPI status. Right now it's in sheet load, so we're trying to get that into a dashboard to then help to manage expectations of when KPIs will be delivered. Do we want to review this at this time? And then if you guys wanted to make recommendations on other charts you think would be helpful, I would like to hear your feedback on that too.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm interested. So if you want to present, feel free.
Okay, I will share screen. Give me a minute. So this is the KPI overview dashboard. So here, this is currently the total number of KPIs we've completed, where we are currently projected to be at based on what is currently in progress. We also have how many new KPIs have been added every month. So in the month of February, we had 8 new ones. This also tells you on this chart how many KPIs were completed in that same month. So here, the total was 5, 1 for engineering, 1 for GitLab, 2 for marketing. We also have a list of information on when the KPIs were completed, as well as the % completion by division, the statuses per division for their total number of KPIs, as well as the rationales for anything that's in progress or blocked.
That's great. And for people watching, this is very meta. So this is not whether we are attaining the goals of our KPIs, but whether we're able to measure the KPIs and whether they're in our data warehouse. So this is KPIs on the KPI status. That's cool. Is this linked from the KPI page?
It is not yet. I was hoping to discuss whether or not we would want to, on the KPI index page, replace this section with that.
Yeah, for sure. Please replace this section with the data you have. That's awesome.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
and I'll just add, one of the things we're trying to do is, as we're going through these different engagement meetings with the different groups, to say, hey, what's important to you? What is going to add the most value around the KPIs? Like, we all acknowledge that we want to get them all done, but really trying to get in the order of priority, so that this will help drive some of that a little bit too, so that people can see the total amount of work being done and not just their world. And the other aspect I'm trying to do is I want to make sure that when we have these engagement discussions, especially around like location factor, like, hey, this is what we just did for engineering. These are now available to you in a different view as well in your group, and we can have repeatables that can be used across the company. So that I expect that the dashboard that Kat just showed to continue to expand and provide more value, so people can get just a big overall view of what's happening. That's the idea.
That makes sense. And yeah, they're not created equal. And for me, I'd love to see these KPIs, except the last one. So 1 to 15 of the GitLab KPIs, I'd love to see those completed. So that would be my input. But you have to weigh my input against that of the other executives. They might have more pressing needs.
Excellent.
So thank you all for attending this meeting. I'm happy to give people time back on their calendars. Thank you guys so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye.